Fantastic. Welcome everyone to our webinar today from Zen on assessment for learning, and thank you all for coming. Just to kind of quickly introduce myself, my name is Katie Hall. I'm a former head of English and primary teacher, and with us sharing her wonderful knowledge today is Vicky Gould, former head of Prestolee SCITT and primary teacher. And could you just give us a quick introduction to yourself, Vicky?
Yeah, hi everybody. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. As Katie just said, I have been a primary school teacher for a long time, predominantly teaching in year 6 class. And then in 2015, I became head of quite a large teacher training organisation here in the Northwest. I'm now doing a bit of work for Zen and working as an educational consultant. And as I said, I'm really happy to be here this morning.
Thank you. And so just to give you all a bit of an idea of what we're going to be covering today. So it's going to be an interactive workshop, and we're going to be looking into how we can ensure effective learning, assessment and marking is taking place within our schools. So we're going to be discussing how to frame and share clear learning objectives, how to draw up successful lesson criteria, and also how to explore a range of different questioning techniques as well. We're then going to move on to some self and peer assessment strategies and some oral and written feedback strategies too. So if you haven't got so already with you, you do need your assessment for learning activity packs with you to hand for the webinar today. So if you haven't got that already, do just go into your email now to get that. The email will be from team@mail.zeneducate.com if you are looking for it. Either just download it or if you're able to print it off, but it will be really helpful for the webinar as well. And so everyone watching the webinar today, you are going to be receiving the slides at the end of today too, and you'll be getting those just via email. Now, we will also be doing some questions as well at the end of the session, so do make sure you're typing those in as we go. Just type them in the Q&A box and we'll hopefully be able to get to those at the end. We may not be able to get to everyone's, but we'll try and get through as many as we can. So let's get started. Every child, oh, shall I start? Sorry. Every child deserves a chance to shine. Our core purpose. Off you go, Vicky.
Thank you, Katie. And just to mirror what Katie just said, it should be an interactive workshop, so please feel free to get involved. We're going to use the chat, we're going to use the Q&A section to share our ideas together. So the first slide really is to put into context the reason why we are here as educators. And actually, for effective assessment for learning to take place, it's really important that we recognise the power of relationships. So the first thing that we must do as educators is to create that learning environment that is based on trusting relationships and human connection. And once we have that as our core aim, our learners will engage, and this will lead to higher levels of achievement. And before we dive into kind of assessment for learning moving forward, I actually wanted to start off by paying tribute to you as colleagues, and the majority of whom are supply teachers and teaching assistants. And actually, you've got a really, really hard job on your hands, because you are entering different classrooms in different contexts, and actually your relentless commitment and resilience and ability to adapt and to develop those relationships is second to none. I've worked with many supply teachers and TAs over the years, and I absolutely admire your relentless commitment and your ability to kind of champion children immediately as you enter the classroom. So I want you to think about your favourite teacher, and I want you to think about why that person sticks out in your mind from your education. And I can guarantee the reasons why those particular teachers stick out for you is because they made you feel valued, they made you feel wanted, and they celebrated you as an individual. And actually, for assessment for learning to take place and be effective, it starts at actually making every child feel valued. Because let's face it, children only get one shot at education. And, you know, looking at the research, due to the pandemic, the research suggests that anxiety and stress, and our children in some cases have experienced trauma. You know, so actually those strong relationships are absolutely key to our children making good progress. Thank you, Katie.
So what is assessment for learning?
Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to our participants first and foremost. So in the chat, let's just share some ideas. Let's just have a discussion about what is assessment for learning. The opposite of assessment of learning. Checking on how efficiently children are learning. Thank you for that. Working out where children are and inform what to do next. Learning and understanding your students. Guiding students and informing how to make progress. Listening to children. Ascertaining learning is taking place. Next steps and feedback. Identifying misconceptions and addressing them. Finding out where children are and moving them on. Supporting students with timely comments. Building self-esteem. Let them feel interested and interesting and making connections with children. Thank you very much for all of those comments. I really appreciate it. Okay, so there are two types of assessment. And the first type is high stakes assessment, summative assessment. And within that involves testing, the testing regime, where children have no support, where there is no engagement. High stakes assessment is merely a performance check within which our children become passive participants. Today, colleagues, we are going to focus on low stakes assessment, assessment for learning, within which is ongoing in lifetime, it's non-threatening, it should feel collaborative and allow exploration and discovery. At the core is learner engagement. It's a process of activating prior knowledge and building on this. And most importantly, our children are active participants. So for me, what is assessment for learning? Well, keep it simple. As educators, we should understand what children know and what children don't know, and how we are going to get them there. So what children know and what they don't know. And that for me is assessment for learning. Looking at sort of more formal definitions, so Dylan Williams, you may have heard of him, he's a professor for educational assessment. He describes assessment for learning as the process used by educators and children to recognise and respond to learning in order to enhance that learning during learning. And just another sort of caption of Looney, who is an executive dean of Dublin City University, describes assessment for learning in teaching of progress used to identify learning needs and adjusting appropriately. As I said, to me, assessment for learning in its priority is to design and practice and serve two purposes: promote learning and make decisions about next steps. So where are our children at? Where are they going? And how will you get them there? And how will you know when they have got there? Okay. Thank you, Katie.
So what is the purpose of assessment?
Okay. I'm going to let you have a little think about this. What is the purpose? Why do we do it? Appreciate some thoughts in the chat. To measure knowledge and understanding. To find out if the child is left behind. To see where the gaps are. So make sure children achieve to the best of their abilities. Encourage the learning process. To know where we're going. To improve our teaching. To promote a love of learning. To understand children's level of thinking. To motivate. To plan for progress. To encourage. To help children reach their potentials. Okay, thank you, Katie. Well, for me, just to summarise, you know, the purpose is we know how children are doing. We focus our efforts on outcomes. And we also know how others know how we are doing. But absolutely, I agree 100% with all of your comments. Actually, it's about children finding their potential and achieving that potential within an environment that children feel valued and supported, and that learning is scaffolded in the right way. Thank you, Katie.
So why are clear learning objectives so important?
Well, let's start off with actually what is a learning objective. For me, a learning objective is the start of that creative thinking when we are in that planning process of planning a series of lessons or a learning journey within which all children can be active participants. So what is a learning objective? Well, it describes what our pupils should know and understand or be able to do by the end of a lesson or a series of lessons or within that learning journey. And actually on that, when I was in the Year 6 classroom, I always used to share the learning objective of the lesson and also the learning objective throughout the learning journey, so that pupils had a really clear understanding of what is happening today, what learning is going to take place tomorrow, and actually what the end outcome will be by the end of that learning journey. So children had a very clear understanding of the direction of learning. I found that sharing this, pupils became more active and involved, more independent, and they could actually articulate that learning and see the reason behind the learning and where it was leading to. Why are clear learning objectives important? Well, they provide a benchmark for the lesson or the series of lessons. They provide learners with clarity. They specify to children what is expected. And for me, a success in sharing the learning objective, for me, I would expect that the learning objective is visual, that it's on the board somewhere for children to see, that it's clearly explained for children and understood, that the learning objective is revisited and reviewed throughout the lesson and on a regular basis, and that the learning objective, if it was to be successful, would be actually in accessible language, people-friendly language, but also as educators, we are sharing key terminology that is subject-specific to different disciplines so that our children are aware and are exposed to that key terminology for that particular lesson. Thank you, Katie.
So we're now going to go on to discuss quality feedback. So what is quality feedback and how can we give it? And do remember, as we're going through too, that you can also put any questions that you have in the Q&A box as you go through, and we'll be answering those at the end. So over to you, Vicky.
Thank you very much. Well, quality feedback should start from the learning objective. And alongside that learning objective, we as educators should have clear success criteria for the lesson in order to give that effective quality feedback. Success criteria which summarises key steps and ingredients for pupils in order for them to fulfil that learning objective, and for us as educators and our pupils to give quality feedback. Quality feedback at the core improves understanding. It empowers our learners and encourages independence. And actually, for me, a great classroom environment depends on partnership, collaboration, and engagement for all. And quality feedback is all about partnership and working towards that common goal. Thank you, Katie.
So now we're going to go on to discussing the difference between evaluative versus descriptive feedback.
Yeah, thank you. So actually, as you can see, it's pretty self-explanatory. There are two types of feedback. That actually, there's descriptive feedback, that's specific feedback in the written form, and that helps the learner understand their current progress towards specific standards. And there's also evaluative feedback, and that provides a summary for the learner on how well she or he has done and performed on a particular task, often based on grades and numbers and check marks and comments. I'd like to know your thoughts. To you as educators, what is quality feedback? Constructive. Knowing what went well and what didn't. being honest. Letting children know what is expected. Positivity, empowerment. Practical tools to enhance and access learning. Amazing. Encouragement and motivation. Support. Students knowing how well they're doing and how to move forward. High expectations, confidence, and self-esteem. How to do things better next time. Interaction. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Katie.
So what is good quality feedback?
Well, these are just some of my thoughts. Good quality feedback should relate to the learning objective and the success criteria, those ingredients to achieving the learning objective. Should be clear, impactful, timely, and should drive pupil progress.
So this is actually one of my favourites. This next one here is Bloom's Taxonomy, which may be familiar to some of you. Vicky, would you like to explain a little bit more about it?
Yeah, I apologise if you've not received the pack. If you haven't, obviously we will get that to you. But there is a practical resource within that pack that gives you an idea of Bloom's Taxonomy. So I will let you have a look at that within your, within your own time. But I wanted to talk to you about this approach to providing effective assessment. Bloom's Taxonomy is a research-based approach to questioning in the classroom. And as you know, as educators, questioning is a key means of knowledge transfer. So actually, it's really important that we make deliberate decisions about the questions that we use within the classroom with our learners. And actually, Bloom's provides us with a really nice, simple approach or strategy to classifying and structuring key questions that effectively will lead to higher levels of thinking and more critical thinkers within our classroom environment. As I said, the pack is pretty self-explanatory. There are different types of questions, and within that pack, it will give you advice and suggestions as to how to use key terminology and frame your questions that you use for your learners and provide that kind of opportunity for children to develop all levels of thinking within their cognitive domain. Now, also in your pack, sorry, I'm just going to get up what I sent you. Katie, is there any way of me minimizing this screen? I just need to get up a Word document.
Are you able to share your screen if I stop sharing?
I don't really need to. Let me just, there we go.
Yeah. Are you able to do it, Vicky?
Yeah, bear with me. It's absolutely fine. You don't necessarily need to see this, but also in your pack, colleagues, alongside the Bloom's Taxonomy framing of questions, there is a really interesting piece of research about questioning that was put together by the TES. And I just want to read you a couple of bits, because actually these are quite striking facts about the way that we use questions within the classroom. So just to quote a couple of bits from that research piece. Teachers ask up to 2 questions every minute, up to 400 questions in a day, around 70,000 questions a year. Questioning accounts for up to a third of teaching time. Most questions are answered in less than a second. That's the average time teachers allow between posing a question and accepting an answer, throwing it to somebody else or answering it themselves. Research has shown that increasing the wait time improves the number and quality of responses. And so from that, colleagues, what I wanted to sort of point out is, if our questioning is going to be effective, we need to provide our learners with thinking time. And it's, as the research suggests, it's quite habitual for teachers and teaching assistants to jump in without that teaching time, that thinking time given to a child. So actually, I would encourage us all as educators to think about the amount of time that we give to children when we pose questions to them, and the types of questions that we use. And as I said, as a really sort of practical way of thinking about this, Bloom's is an effective sort of tool for us all to use. Also within your packs, there is a task for you to try out. When I used to deliver lectures to trainee teachers, we actually watched a snippet of a story on YouTube, and then we used that practical resource to sort of frame and write different types of questions. And colleagues, if you get time, I would encourage you to do that. And also at the top of this slide, colleagues, is a link to a YouTube video, which is a really nice video that very simply describes and explains Bloom's taxonomy as a way of structuring questions and transferring that knowledge for children in the classroom. Thank you, Katie. Katie, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I think I just kind of really back up what you're saying. I mean, I was taught about Bloom's taxonomy when I was doing my PGCE, and it just really became a great foundation for me to build on my questioning. And as you said yourself, there are so many questions teachers ask constantly, but the real, I guess, overhanging question is, are we asking the right types of questions? What are children learning from these? And Bloom's taxonomy is a great way for you to measure pupils' understandings using assessment for learning, to see not only can they recite and remember what you've told them, but can they then apply it? Can they use it to analyse, evaluate, and hopefully in the future use that to create as well? So it's a really great, as you can see, like it's set out in the steps there, and it's a really fantastic way for your pupils to build on those steps as well. And don't be afraid of sharing these steps with them. You know, you don't need to go into the detail you can see here, but for them to be aware of the types of ways they can show their understanding is a great way for them to be reflective learners as well.
Yeah, and absolutely. And, you know, I'm just thinking and reflecting on my experience in the Year 6 classroom. Actually, to better prepare children for the next stage in education, they need to be able to think critically at a higher level. And that's really important to prepare them for Key Stage 3 or further up. You know, so actually this is a deliberate way of children actually developing those core life skills. Thank you, Katie.
So, quality talk in the classroom.
Okay. So at the heart of assessment for learning and promoting pupil progress lies quality talk. I'd like to know your thoughts. What's your understanding of quality talk in the classroom in terms of assessment for learning? I really appreciate your contributions, by the way. Concentration. Mental well-being. Discussion. Students' participation. Listening. Involvement. Trust. Confidence. Reflection. Positivity. Engagement. Empathy. Connection. Non-judgmental. Inclusive. Communication skills. Equal opportunity. Self-awareness. Social skills. Openness. Curiosity. Collaborative. Equity. Involvement. Patience. Okay, thank you very much for that. Let me just minimise the chat for a sec. Yep, all of the above. Thank you so much for that, colleagues. Quality talk is all about children engaging, collaborating, interacting with other children. It provides a safe environment for children to explore and discover and learn from each other. And at the centre, it should promote confidence and self-esteem, and therefore lead to better academic outcomes and social ability. The best classrooms that I walk into, and I've been in many schools, in many classrooms, quality talk is a feeling. You can walk in and you can see children being vibrant and interactive in a safe and respectful environment. For me, quality talk is all inclusive. It essentially extends children's vocabulary and leads to cognitive process. And for colleagues that have had experience working with children with special educational needs, such as children with autism, that's really, really important to lead to that cognitive process and to have an environment in which children learn from each other, share ideas in a respectful, vibrant and safe environment. Thank you, Katie.
So marking, what's the point?
Okay. What's your thoughts, Katie, on marking?
Sometimes I have thought to myself, what's the point? I mean, marking is something that for those of you who might have been teaching for a bit longer will have seen the changes, quite radical changes that we've had over the last even, 10, 15 years. It's gone from the red pen marking over everything with all the crosses included to now we use, pink pens. Pink to make you think, green means go, and all these kind of different colours. Now, certainly there is, I think, benefits to that. It's really important with regards to marking, I think, to ensure that you're telling pupils what they've done well, but also pushing them to think about, what they could be doing better and to assess through their work as well to see, how they could improve it too, as that's a very valuable part of their learning. But certainly there is debate over some schools who it's really adding to teachers' workload. So I think it's a really important discussion for us to be having. How much marking is the right amount, where it allows teachers to be able to further students' learning, but not also just add to their workload without showing any benefit for the child as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally agree. As a Year 6 teacher for a number of years, it was probably the least enjoyable part of my job. And I've worked with teachers, all across different contexts, and some teachers that have actually, our teaching assistants that have actually left the profession. And when you look at the retention rates within this profession and the reasons why people leave, it is usually to do with excessive workload. And I can vouch and guarantee, and for colleagues that are experienced, that excessive workload is usually caused by excessive onerous marking. However, marking is integral to quality assessment for learning, effective assessment for learning, and it is integral to moving children on. But what I would take away from actually what's the point in marking is a little bit, it's sort of mirroring what Katie said, which is actually marking should be smart. It should have a point. It should allow our children to think critically about their own work. It should develop independence. It should serve a purpose of children making improvements and acting on that feedback and moving forward. And if it doesn't do all of the above, I would go back to the question, what is the point? So actually, we've talked at the beginning about children's mental health and well-being. And I've supported lots of NQTs, so newly qualified teachers and trainee teachers at the beginning of their careers. And actually it's really, really difficult to get that balance within marking. So I go back to, for it to have a point, it should be smart. It should not impact on your work-life balance. It should encourage children to think critically. It should encourage children to be more independent and to be able to act on your advice and ultimately make improvements and move learning forwards. Have you got anything more to add, Katie, to that?
No, I think, again, I just agree with everything you've just said there. Especially, I agree with the fact, you know, I'm a former teacher myself, and it was a huge part of the stress that I was under was, you know, being an upper key stage 2 teacher, especially, that the kind of rigorous marking that had to be done. And it was really for me, I think it was, I couldn't see how it was benefiting my pupils, and yet it was something that was just kind of pushed upon us that it had to be done, and there wasn't really any healthy debate within the school around it. And you know, I'm sure all of you can speak to numerous teachers yourselves and also know yourselves that you've been in that situation before. So I think certainly it's very, very important to understand how to mark in a smart way and ensure that your pupils know what is coming out of that marking. You know, what are the pros of what they've been doing, you know, what have they learned, and also what can I do next to continue to improve that learning. If they can get those three, then you're doing something right there. And again, things like verbal feedback as well have been really kind of pushed in schools recently as sometimes as an aside to written marking to ensure that pupils are getting that one-to-one feedback from a teacher. It doesn't always have to be written down on the page.
Thank you, Katie.
So okay. Self and peer assessment.
Sorry, Katie, I keep interrupting. Okay, self and peer assessment, another form of effective assessment for learning. So what is it? Well, it's the practice of children assessing their own work and that of others within the classroom. And actually, when you look at the research, when children are actively involved within that process, it promotes progress and better outcomes. So it's all about children thinking about their own work and thinking about and celebrating and valuing achievements of their own and that of others. What I would say is I would be cautious about peer assessment in particular, because in my experience, it takes considerable time and effort for peer assessment and self-assessment to be fully embedded. For it to be effective, we as educators must, within our classrooms, have a culture and ethos based on respect, positivity, support, and children feeling valued and respectful to each other. So for effective self and peer assessment, for me, we must model that process to our children. We must demonstrate to our children how to give constructive feedback, both written and oral. We must give children direct oral and written feedback examples so that they become accustomed to the process, and that therefore self and peer assessment actually has impact and moves learning forwards. If it's done well, it will lead to better outcomes, children feeling more confident and collaborating in a really positive way in terms of celebrating achievements and recognising next steps, and children being active participants within that sort of safe environment is absolutely integral to effective assessment for learning. Again, Katie, have you got anything more to add?
I'd say, again, just with regards to peer assessment, sometimes it can be quite easy to fall into a bad habit almost. Again, if you have especially a lot of pressure from, you know, a huge amount of marking on your own plate, to allow children to peer assess in a way to reduce your own marking workload. And that is something that I would really recommend not doing at all, because what may happen as a result of that is the work getting checked by you. So a really important part of peer assessment is that you are also overseeing it too as the teacher. You're not purely allowing one pupil to mark another pupil's work and then put it away, because then we're not sure at all how effective it is as well. So certainly building that culture of respect, building the culture of understanding, for children to be able to apply their knowledge to another child's work as well. And again, doing that in a respectful way too, are really important steps to take. And I personally would start with verbal peer assessment, and you can sit with the children, and whilst they're doing that, go around in groups. That's a really nice way to do it. When you feel that they're confident in doing that, you can start some pupils then afterwards possibly doing some written peer assessment too. And then you'll feel a little bit more confident knowing that it's been done appropriately as well.
Absolutely. And it will lead to, you know, all of those core life skills that we kind of want to embed in our children. You know, children taking responsibility for their own learning, taking ownership of where they're up to and what they need to do as individuals to move forward. And really, as I said, it is about children feeling valued and supported and recognising sort of those next steps, and it being a collaborative process. It's really powerful.
So here are some rules for peer assessment.
Okay, so we talked about modelling the process. That's what's really key here. We cannot just think that it's a given that children will be respectful, that they will have the ability to provide, as Katie said, that effective feedback with one another. So peer assessment rules is all about modelling that process. It's about training your children to always go back to the learning objective and the ingredients to get to that learning objective. And if they are clear, that success criteria is clear and the guidance is there, it will act as a scaffold to facilitate effective peer assessment. It is about a feeling, a culture within the classroom, and it starts with the educator modelling that process so that children become accustomed to that process and are able to give each other effective feedback.
I'd just add on the end of that as well to say that it's often quite easy to have your higher ability or gifted and talented pupils being ones who you think may be fantastic at peer assessment, but often they may only be able to say to another pupil what's right and what's wrong. And I think going back to Bloom's taxonomy we discussed earlier, it's important then to have the discussion with those pupils to get them to understand how to apply that knowledge. So they may be able to say, yes, I can recognise when something's correct or incorrect, but can they critically analyse it and say, what about it could be better? What about it wasn't right, but where did they go wrong? So there's lots of elements there that you can use as well to really reinforce and deepen the learning of higher and gifted ability. So higher ability and gifted and talented pupils that may sometimes think that they might just want to quickly tick it off and go, well, I know this already, so that's okay with me. It's a fantastic opportunity there for you to really deepen their learning and have effective feedback for them too.
Thank you.
So the feedback sandwich.
Yeah, this is just an example of something, a practical example of something that I found quite effective within the classroom. You know, we're encouraged children to talk to one another about their learning and to provide that effective assessment, but actually as a way of framing that with clear learning objectives and clear steps to success, our success criteria. Something that I did as a teacher was provide them with this structure, which I call the feedback sandwich, which is all about actually encouraging children to first of all provide their peer with positive feedback, and then a point of how to move that learning forward through constructive feedback, and always ending with that positive feedback so that children feel valued and empowered to work on that constructive feedback.
Excellence for all.
Okay, so this is kind of my conclusion, and I absolutely, you know, appreciate all of your written feedback today. I really do, and actually it's really key and been core to the workshop, so thank you so much for that. We started off by saying every child should have a chance to shine, and with effective assessment for learning using some of the key techniques that we've discussed today, actually us as educators will endeavour to constantly promote learning so that no child is missed. Children only get one shot at education, and we as educators must provide that opportunity for every child to shine. So good assessment, what do they know, what do they not know, and how will we get them there? And just to finish off, I was reading, this is what I do in my spare time, a research piece, which I'm just going to read you a quote from Professor Hodgson. I kind of liked it, and I thought actually it finishes off the workshop rather nicely. It says, "The teacher must know his children and must sympathise with them. He will seek at each stage to adjust their minds, to draw upon their experience as a supplement to his own, and to take them, as it were, into partnership for the acquisition of knowledge." And I think that kind of summarises some of the key discussions we've had this morning. As I said, this is an interactive workshop, so I think, Katie, we're going to take some questions.
Yeah, I don't know if we've got a slide. Here we go, slide for the questions. So yes, let's have a look. I know Anjali, who is here with us too from Zen, has been having a look at some of the questions through the Q&A box and also through the chat. I can already see a couple on the Q&A, so I think we should probably just start with those. So Habiba has asked, is there a fixed checklist that is followed for AFL, one that you can tick to assess a child?
Okay, so I'm glad that you asked that, because in the pack that I sent, well, somebody sent out to you from Zen, there is a really simple sort of frame for assessment, and it asks key questions and allows us to go through that framework of key assessment for learning thinking points at the planning stage before you deliver a lesson, and also within the lesson. It's just a practical guide really, and gives you some sort of scaffolding and guidance to when you're thinking about assessment for learning. So I'm hoping that colleagues find that useful. And as I said, if you've not received the pack, you will do by the end of the day.
Wonderful. And Sukhbinder is just asking about finding a bit more about the qualities of feedback. So hopefully what we were discussing there has really helped with that too. So I'm going to jump onto the chat as well, where we've had some questions come through. So Gloria has asked, how does the peer assessment, or how can the peer assessment affect the peer relationship between themselves? I think that's a really interesting question. And how can some negative feedback lead to more issues with the learners than positive outcomes?
Yep, and that's why I go back to modelling that process is key. It isn't a given that children are going to be positive with one another, or even provide that effective feedback. So, and as I said to you during the workshop, actually, it takes considerable time and effort for effective peer assessment to be fully embedded. And as we all know, as adults, children, you know, whatever age we are, that actually negative feedback or the use of negative language can have a huge impact on our self-esteem. So it is about creating that culture and almost spoon feeding children and providing that model of positive language and framing that positive language. And it also goes back to, actually, are the children clear of the learning objective, and are they clear on their key steps to success to achieve that learning objective? So we've got that good relationships, that culture of respect, that clear understanding of the direction of learning and that modelling of the process, everything then should be sort of implemented in a positive way and lead to that effective assessment. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that was a really comprehensive answer as well. Thank you. Zaf has asked, is there a textbook you would recommend for an NQT on assessment?
Right, so again, I keep referring to this pack that I sent out. There is a reading list there of key documentation and research pieces and textbooks that give you really sort of that understanding of the theoretical aspects of assessment, but also give you practical suggestions within the classroom so you can directly apply that theory and knowledge within the classroom. So have a look at that reading list. The other person that I always champion is Professor Dylan Williams, who is a professor of educational assessment. I quoted him at the beginning of the workshop. If you go on YouTube, there's loads of freebies that you can find from Dylan Williams. He is exceptional and very inspiring.
Thank you. Nisha has asked, again, a very interesting question here. She's a new TA and has asked, how do you assess the child's work without going against the teacher's assessment?
Right. So again, it starts with relationships. So, you know, and again, I take my hat off and I absolutely want to pay tribute to people, to supply teachers and teaching assistants that are not consistently in one environment. But you are, as I've witnessed in my career, are experts at creating that relationship swiftly. So actually, if you've got that core relationship between teacher and TA, that will provide that foundation of you as a teaching assistant to take your own initiative and your own knowledge and provide that feedback for the teacher. And I think if that relationship is there and it's fully developed and it's based on trust and positivity, I think any good teacher would take on that feedback, because ultimately, I'm telling you, teaching assistants know certain children better than teachers do in certain environments. So I think it's based on relationships, trust, respect, and ultimately will lead to that sort of open communication and dialogue.
Fantastic, thank you. I think we've got time just for a couple more questions. So Jordan has asked, students often focus on numbers and marks rather than teachers' feedback. How can we reinforce the feedback is more valuable than the number on their final assessment?
It is very true. I actually don't even think it's just pupils. It's not just children that focus on that. I think adults do too. But it is all about kind of providing that focus, I suppose, on that written feedback. And if you are giving pupils opportunities to interact with that feedback and act on it and become more independent and see the value in it, then you hopefully will get the child to hook in on that information more so than the grades and the numbers. But it's a training process, it's a modelling process, and it's a culture process. Katie, have you got anything to add to that?
I mean, yeah, I'd certainly agree exactly with what you're saying there. It's not simple to do, and especially when for some children too, we need to especially be respectful of the fact and be aware of the fact that there may be at home as well, there may be more pressure possibly on achieving results as opposed to purely just progressing and developing their learning. So as I say, it's something that's not easy to do, so that there's multiple people that need to be involved within this. You know, speaking to parents about it is very important. Parents' evenings, getting them to really understand what is important about their learning. And it's not just simply about getting those numbers on the papers, like you've said there, Jordan. And I think as well, just that having that open conversation, children are very open to listening to us when we're showing our open honesty to them as well. So take advantage of that, you know, take advantage of the fact that they trust what you're going to say, and use that trust to show them that what you're doing is for the best outcomes for them. It's never purely just about those numbers, and it won't be, you know, throughout life. It's not going to be, you know, we know that ourselves as adults. So the real purpose of it is to develop as learners. And again, going back to Bloom, as I absolutely love a bit of Bloom's taxonomy, again, that's just another great way of reinforcing that too, because often, especially when it comes to some questioning and kind of those summative assessments that they have at the end of the year, sometimes some of the questions only get them at the bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. Can they just recite what they've learned already? But getting them to apply it at a higher level, that's a real deep learning that we're trying to encourage with pupils. So just keep telling them why that's so important.
Mm. And also, in the words of Rita Pearson, who I really enjoy listening to, again, she's on YouTube, she puts it quite simple. She says, children don't learn from people they don't like. And that's a really interesting concept. Children don't learn from people they don't like. So that engagement, that connection is absolutely key.
Yeah, I certainly agree. I think we can all remember at least one teacher from growing up that maybe we didn't like as much, and possibly, I don't know if we maybe felt that we learned as much from them as the teacher that we remember fondly, that we'll always remember that one thing, particularly that they taught us, whether that was 10, 20 or 30 years ago now.
Absolutely.
So I just want to take the opportunity now to say thank you so much to everyone who has come to this webinar today. I'm hoping that you've all received some kind of really great information that you can take and apply to the schools that you're going to be working in. And a really, really big thank you as well to Vicky for sharing such comprehensive knowledge of assessment for learning. I think I've certainly learned something. I'm sure everyone has as well too. So just again, a very big thank you. And for those of you, I've seen a couple of people asking about the packs. So that was receiving the learning pack and also as well about the slides. So you will be receiving both of those. Apologies to anyone who didn't receive the pack before the webinar itself, but hopefully all the information in there plus the slides means that you're able to do some learning yourself afterwards if you want to learn more about any of the topics we've discussed.
Yeah. And thank you, just to mirror what Kate said, thank you for coming, thank you for your insightful comments, and thank you for your relentless commitment and your resilience. You know, it shouldn't go unnoticed.
Thanks so much for coming today, and I hope to see you at the next webinar. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.